All right, so now we look forward to the first lesson to be delivered by Brother Tian Seng. Before he comes up, maybe I'll just briefly introduce him. Most of us should be already familiar with him. But before Brother Tian Seng left to help the work at Eastside Church of Christ, we know he's one of the elders at Limapiro Church of Christ. So we know from the qualifications of elders that they have to be, as a family man and a married man, right? They have to be qualified, isn't it? They have to be a husband of one wife and to be a good father to his faithful children. So by virtue of him being able to be an elder, I think you can see he's more than qualified to deliver this subject to us this morning. And we know the family of Brother Tian Seng as well. He's married to Sister Gyo Ing, and I've been informed that he has been married for 36 years to date. In fact, I think he just celebrated his wedding anniversary this past week. All right, so congratulations, Uncle Tian Seng. We know he has 3 children, Cynthia, Iris, and Cornelius, all of whom are faithful Christians. And he has also 2 grandchildren, Noah and Amelia. So without further ado, we look forward to a lesson by Brother Tian Seng.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, brethren, and I'm so glad to see you all and to be with us in this seminar. We'd like to thank the organizer from the Limapiro Church of Christ who have come out with this seminar and allow us to learn from one another and to share from the Word of God regarding marriage, especially in terms of communication between husband and wife, and also communication between parents and children, which Brother Peter Chin will be speaking in the next segment. I'll share my slides now. Give me a second. Right, I'm sure you can see my slides and can hear me. That's okay.
Yep, can see.
Okay, good. I should start from now. The topic of our seminar is healthy communication between husband and wife, right? Most of us go through secular educations and we learn things and we read books, mostly for work purpose, for knowledge, and for self-interest. But when it comes to communication in marriage, we do not really learn. Neither we will bother to read about it. We think that when 2 persons get married, they will know what to do. It just so-called get on naturally, right? And that's the reason why sometimes people don't even prepare themselves for marriage. They think that things will just work out. But it's crucial, especially in marriage, to have healthy communications, because if there is a communication breakdown, relationships will suffer. And that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to learn how to have healthy communication in marriage. The Straits Times reported on the 3rd of May 2021 that couples in Singapore who are married more recently are breaking up earlier. And this statistic was done by the Ministry of Social and Family Development in Singapore. They actually tracked 29 cohorts of married couples between 1987 and 2015. So between 1987 to 2015, there are 29 years. Okay, and each group of people, so there are 29 group of people, or cohorts of couples that were tracked. Okay, and they found that those who wed more recently break up earlier. And to me, that's quite alarming, right? So it says in the newspaper report, it says that those who wed in 2006, 60% split up before their 10th wedding anniversary. So the implication is that within the 10 years, less than 10 years, they break up, 16% of them, okay? And if you talk about 16%, it's actually 1 out of 6, okay? 1 out of 6 marriages, right, or couples, right? However, in 1987, right, the cohort, the group of people who are married, 87% split up before their 10th wedding anniversary. So between 1987 and year 2006 is increase of 100%. Okay, the percentage double. And if you look at this chart, you can see that in 1987 there are 87%, right? And which break up before their 10-year. And now in 2006, which is about maybe 14, 15 years from now, they are married, right? If they look at this group of people who are married and they look at how many break up, it's actually 16% breaking up before the 10th wedding anniversary. Okay, so to those of us here who are married for many, many years and celebrating the 20th, 30th, or maybe 40th wedding anniversary, congratulations. You've done well. But in recent time, people who are married more recently actually did not last very long as you look at the statistics. So they interviewed social workers who work with divorcing couples to ask what attribute to such problem. Okay, so this is not a detailed study, but from what this person, several people who have dealt with divorcing couples, they actually analyze about 5 different factors, right? First, family stress factors. And that is like taking care of children, households, finances, some with addictions problem, health problem, or parenting issues, okay? Or of course, that could be people who actually have a lot of family stress problem, especially in the current COVID situation, where you don't have your domestic helper coming in from overseas. Couples has actually burdened with taking care of household chores. And it's mentioned that in the now statistic that most of this burden goes to the wives, right? The wives or the mothers, right? And this can be quite a stress.
Okay, time for us to start our class.
Husband do not help out in that area, right? Secondly, less quality time. And this quality time could be attributed to people not spending time together to build relationship, to talk. And most couples think that if they have been in courtship for a while, for several years, well, it is quite easy to get along and to continue to maintain a good relationship when they are married. Okay, but that's not true because the situation before marriage is so much different from the people living in the married life, right? Living together, take care of the various stress and burden, right? So here we talk about people who are still singles before they're married, they're courting. There's less thing to concern about, okay? And they're living apart. They don't see each other every day. But when they come together to live in the same house, and the husband and wife, there's difficulties in like maintaining their relationship, especially also to take care of the family stress. And then less quality time was very apparent even in recent years, especially more people have an education and there are dual incomes couples, right? A lot of them have actually both husband and wife working, right? And this is also attributing cost to less quality time. Everybody's working, they don't have time for one another, they work overtime, they work on weekends as well, right? Sometimes. So there's less time for couples to spend time together, right? Thirdly, there's this focus on careers, okay? After we having income, there's career. Nowadays, careers are very demanding, right? And couples spend too much time at work and neglect the relationships with wives and with their families, or wives with husband as well. Fourthly, there's this shifting perceptions and less stigma towards divorce. Well, we said, well, Christians will not have this problem, but I think the world will influence us if we are not careful. Right? We are committed to the marriage relationship, but out there in the world, right, people do not take divorce as something bad, a stigma or embarrassing, right? It's getting very common, right? And people just divorce for any reason, right? And last but not least, the poor conflict management skill, right? Not able to resolve conflict and issues that cannot be resolved easily, right, will actually continue to so-called haunt the relationship and affect the relationship if they do not know how to handle it. So why communication? Because when there's no communication in marriage, there's no way for a couple to live in harmony together. So the various issues that we look at underlying this is the inability to stay together and stay united and even to communicate. And the inability to communicate well is also a cause for conflict in the relationship. So couples who are generally very efficient or effective in communicating to one another will have chances of marital success in the sense that they can live together well, they can understand each other, and more importantly, they can handle conflicts because conflict is very much of this marital relationship. So that's why we talk about communication. But before we go on to communication, let's us define communication. In Oxford Dictionary online, it says, communication is the imparting and exchanging of communication information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. In this particular website called Communication Theory, it gives a very, very long definition. But I think it is good for discussion purpose. It says communication is giving and receiving and exchanging ideas, information, signals, and messages through appropriate media, enabling individuals or groups to persuade, to seek information, to give information, to express emotions. This broad definition includes body language, skills of speaking and writing. Now this thing is a mouthful, right? It's a lot of things, but what he's saying that communication is just not like I'm just speaking or I'm just talking, or it's just telling you something. Like communication can have different purpose: to persuade a person, or to seek information, to give information, even to like deal with, to discuss a problem, right? Without any objective or where this discussion will lead to. So if you look at this particular flow chart, you can see that first is giving and receiving or exchanging. So it's not just you talking to your wife, but you must allow your wife to talk to you, right? That also works both ways, right? So communication is both ways. Secondly, is giving ideas, information, signals, and messages, which means that the content of communication is important. You can just say, sometimes people just mumble and then expect the other person to understand what it is, or use a very short-cut way of talking. Right? You WhatsApp, you can always use a lot of shortcut. Like WTP, TW means by the way, or NP means no problem. Right? And sometimes even in our verbal communication, we use shortcut and we expect the other party to understand. So, but a proper communication has ideas, information, and that tell us that we need to be very careful about content, right? Careful about what we say. Partly is through appropriate media, right? Yes, we are in the kind of digital age where we talk to one another, we WhatsApp one another. Sometimes even inside the house, we're in a different room, we WhatsApp the other, and it says, what do you like to eat for lunch? The kind of thing, I'm going out. Actually we're in the same house, right? We do that sometimes because we're so lazy to walk, just across the room or several rooms, right? And well, that's kind of communication may be appropriate because it's short, right? What to eat, I like to eat chicken rice and so on, right? But then, different type of communication requires different kind of media, right? And so sometimes when it comes to solving conflict, it requires time. The place, and the proper environment and the mindset, and people are allowed to have time to really communicate, and it's best done face to face or in person, and not through WhatsApp, or making an argument through WhatsApp, or trying to solve a problem through WhatsApp. Finally, it is to persuade, to seek, to give information, and to express emotion, right? So why is healthy communication important? Okay, and healthy communication, of course, is important for healthy relationship. And let's consider firstly marriage, right? Who started marriage? God actually instituted marriage in the book of Genesis, right? And one means to live together and do not expect us to be committed to one another. So if a communication breaks down, marriage will break down, right? The communication breakdown will result in destroying marriage and offending God. So that's important. To keep marriage, we need to ensure communication do not stand in the way or cause a breakdown in the marriage. Secondly, it's important because we want to do the will of God, right? We must have the desire to live and to bring one's life into harmony with God's will. And not only that, with our spouses or our partners in life, right? That we must live with until death. And that is important. And more even important for us religiously as a Christian, healthy communication allow us to have that relationship that's important between husband and wife so that we can worship God in the proper way. But there cannot be proper worship without reconciliation between husband and wife. But sometimes the husband and wife do not talk or do not communicate with one another. It is in the book of Matthew chapter 5, verse 23 to verse 24. Though this verse is not talking about husband and wife, but it applies to any relationship, right? Even in the church or among people that you know. In Matthew 5, verse 23 says, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. And so this verse basically say that God will not accept our worship if our relationship with our partner or with our husband or wife is not right before God. Last but not least, the importance of forgiveness. Yes, as Christians, we receive the forgiveness in Christ, but if we do not forgive others, guess what? God will not forgive us. So in the book of Matthew chapter 6, verse 14, verse 15, it says, for if you forgive men their trespass, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So if you look at this particular slides, you see how important communications is. Once communications break down, marriage will break down. One marriage break down, our relationship with our spouse will break down. We cannot live in harmony with God's will. We cannot continue to worship in the right way with God, and we will lose the forgiveness of sin. And that is very important because that affects our eternal life. What are the keys to communication? Basically, there are three important things about communication. It's not just about what to do, but there's some very basic things. And first is trust. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 24 to verse 25, when God after God created man and woman, the scripture says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, and the man, his wife, were not ashamed. So how close is that relationship when God created Adam and Eve? It was so close, it was described as one flesh. Okay, it means two persons, but one person, right? One flesh. And they were not ashamed, they were very close. So communication will work only if couples put their trust and confidence in one another, right? They're able to share things that are confidential and to keep them confidential, right? So trust is precious and is important, and no solid foundation for communication can be found outside trust. Secondly, we see the second key is understanding, right? Understanding can be talk about consideration or knowing the other person well, right? In Proverbs 24, verse 3 says, through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. Okay, so through that very channel, right, homes are established upon the understanding. is the basis of effective communication. So understanding enables you to even read between the lines. Remember, sometimes when even our wife, before they say something, you know they're going to say this, or even they say something in short, you know actually what it means, right? Because you've known each other so well, you understand each other's in terms of habits and values and way of thinking and communicating so well. So you will not misunderstand the other person, right? You will read even eye movements, voice tone, right? And you can understand when your wife is angry, right? Or your husband is angry just by looking at the person, right? And so that remain with that understanding, you will have less conflict, right, in the family, right? So many homes have been destroyed because of misunderstanding, right? The third key to healthy communication is openness, right? Husband and wife are the closest friend you can ever find, or closest companion. In fact, the very purpose of marriage is companionship. God gave us the value of companionship. Right? I remember when I'm young, I always want to look for a best friend, right? A friend who you can talk to, who share the same interests. I think it's always something that you sought for. And one of the way to find a best friend is to get married, because whether you found your wife or husband, he's supposed to be your best friend. Right? God used the word in Genesis, the helpmate, a companion that is helpful, right? In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 28 says, so husbands ought to love their own wife as their own body, for he who loves his wife loves himself. So if you love your wife, and God says you must love it to the extent that you're loving yourself, okay? That actually throw out the idea of being selfish, right? Because you will not be selfish to yourself or unkind to yourself. So you think about loving is loving yourself. If a person loves the wife as himself, as mentioned in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 28, then it would means that it is a very close relationship, right? That both must be open to one another and to walk in sincerity. So whether it is before marriage or after marriage, it's important even to share with one another our day-to-day lives or activities, right? And to be open to one another, right? And openness breeds trust, and trust is the foundation of effective communication. I've written 3 short articles on trust, understanding, and openness in weekly kind of notes on marriage and families, right? And these are actually in the link. So once you get this PowerPoint, you click the link and it brings you to 3 articles on these 3 subjects. I'll leave you to read on these articles. So next we come to the reasons for communication breakdown. So what are the reasons for communication breakdown? First, the lack of communication, right? So it means what? It means that work, kids, digital preoccupation, you meet your friend and then or family members, everybody on their handphone. They're supposed to be talking to one another, everybody looking at their messages or their Facebook or their Twitter, or trying to catch up with many other people digitally. When the person in front of you is supposed to be communicating with you or spending time with you. Okay, how we spend our time also, right? You are watching too much of TV and not spending time with the family. That is also a cause to lack of communication. Being unskilled in communication, I think communication is something that you can learn, right? Obviously, we can learn a lot of things, and one thing we can learn is communication. For example, public speaking, you can learn, right? Customer service, you can learn, right? Teaching, you can learn. So even in speaking to one another or building relationship, you can learn. So some couples actually have difficulties or unskilled in communication because they learn communication skill maybe say from their parents, and some of these skills may not be very effective or very helpful, right? So sometimes when they start talking, they always end up in argument because the way the thought process, the kind of words is used, always agitate the other person, right? It's not helpful. So they always have arguments, conflict, and then sometimes it creates bad feelings for that person and for yourself. because you're unskilled in communication. Negativity in communication also kills healthy communication. Okay, imagine every time you start to talk, the other person blame you, criticize you, make sarcastic remark against you, or constantly nag you, right? That is not helpful in communication, because these ways of communication actually kills the interest talk anymore, because you are more like seems to be judged than to be allowed to speak, okay, or to say something. What else? Some other things are like emotional problems. Sometimes we get angry and it gets into a way. Jealousy, hatred, anxiety, unhappiness, mental illness, okay, get in the way. Sometimes there's relationship problems that are not solved, maybe very long kind of thing, not forgiven, issues in the past that not settled, right? So things like it ends up like you do not value one another as you would on the day you are married, right? And so sometimes that creates a problem, right? Attitudes toward one another, the loss of love, right? The Bible talk about in the book of Revelation, right? The people, the church there lost their first love. So some couples also lost their first love, right? And there are ways to rekindle it. Firstly, of course, look at the importance of following the will of God, and to seek God to help you to recover your marriage, even though it's badly damaged, by taking steps to to get in touch, to build up, to do things that will actually bring two persons together. Finally, unresolved conflicts. It is known that every marriage has conflicts. But some of these conflict very minor thing, right? You can live with it, you can quarrel about it, but then it's not a major one. Right? Studies say that actually people can live with conflict, that conflicts in marriage that are minor, right? And they can forgive one another and just move on, right? Or compromise. But then unresolved conflict about some very difficult one, and sometimes like their personality differences, and where both sides cannot compromise and learn to appreciate that they are different, right? We married our wife thinking that they will be like us, and the wife married you thinking that you are like him, but actually they are two different persons, right? Two different personalities. Also behaviors that you cannot stand, right? And the other person refused to change. It is very irritating sometimes in marriage. Sometimes it creates unresolved conflict and some other issues in marriage as well. So remember these are the reasons for communications breakdown, very common. Each of us will experience differently, and we'll see later how we can learn from some of these things. So finally, we look at 4 ways to improve marriage, communication in marriage. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, say, let your speech always be seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer one another. So using the acronym SALT, where speak the truth, active listening, lifting up the others, and think before you speak. First, in effective communication, we must speak the truth. Colossians 3 verse 9 to 10 says, do not lie to one another, since we put off the old man with his deed, and they put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. So as Christians, we do not lie to one another. So in marriage, we should be speaking the truth and be transparent to one another. Right? Remember Genesis 2, verse 24, verse 25, the husband and wife are so close, they are called one flesh. They should think of good things that then we can say to them, right? So think of good things, positive things, right? We talk about negativity, think of positive things. In the book of Philippians chapter 4 says, whatever things that's true, whatever thing is noble, whatever thing that's just, pure, lovely, and so on, think of these things, right? So think of good things and always be ready to say good things and helpful things in the communication. And we do not need to pretend, because if we pretend and the truth will show up later, then it may be too late. A for active listening. much of communication is active listening. Proverbs 18 verse 13 says, he who answers a matter before he hears it is folly and shame to him. So what it says here is that sometimes we jump the gun. We do not listen and we make certain assumption, and we make mistake, right? We make mistake by not listening. So communication is not just talking. In fact, most of the communication that is important is actually listening first, right? And what is active listening, right? Is to listen to what your spouse is saying. James chapter 1 verse 19 says, so then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, right? So here it says that we need to be swift to hear, right? Some people say we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because God wants us to listen twice as much as we talk. Oh, may be true, right? But it's a wise principle in communication. So we must listen, right? As much as we want to talk, we must importantly first listen to what your spouse is saying, right? And also to what your spouse is not saying. Sometimes he's not saying, but he's having some gesture, looking not happy, certain body language. Communications in no verbal sense is between 60 to 90% non-verbal, right? So which means that you can look at the person and understand some communication, some messages. So active listening is also to listen not just the facts, but also to your spouse feeling. So it's like talking about empathy. Empathic listening is empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings with the other person. Okay, means to wear the person's shoe, right? To understand where he is and how he feels, and that's very kind of a very good kind of listening to understand how the person feels while he's talking to you. Finally, communication would be effective and healthy if one could paraphrase and summarize what you hear, and that's to reflect what the person says, right? So, for instance, if a person says that you feel neglected, because you're watching TV all night, and so on the receiving end, whether the wife or husband, he could reply this way: "This is what I hear you're saying. You feel neglected when I watch TV all night. Is that correct?" Okay, so that is the way to communicate, to show that you understand and to confirm your understanding. L is for lifting up the others. Now, everybody needs to be lifted up and encouraged. Ephesians 4 verse 29 says, "Let no corrupt words proceed out of your mouth, but what that is good for necessary edification, they may impart grace to the hearer." So the word edification is talking about building up. Okay, so we should not communicate by cursing, blaming, accusing. Start the morning by scolding one another, or communication by something negative. Okay, think of things that you can do to build up one another as well. Right, speak good things to your spouse. Okay, we are in the very quality control kind of environment. We always say what is bad. What is bad in the government? What is bad in the society? But we never praise people, right? So in marriage, it's not healthy. We need to praise our wife, right? And give positive comment, right? Confess positive things that happen in a marriage. Express your love to one another, right? And speak about things you do or you do not like. Finally, T is for think before you speak. And now how important is that we speak without thinking, and then we get ourselves into a lot of problems. James 1 and verse 26 says that if anyone among you think he's religious and does not bridle his tongue and deceive his own heart, this religion is useless. So what the key here is that you do not control your tongue, right? So we need to control our tongue and think before we speak. Be careful about what you communicate. The content is important. Proverbs 25 verse 11 says, "A word freely spoken is like apples of gold." Right? So freely spoken in terms of words, in terms of how you say it, and also when you say it. Proverbs 15 and verse 23 talk about how you say it. Okay. So we come in the conclusion, we look at a few things. We look at speaking the truth, active listening, and lifting up one another. Right? I think I ran over time a bit, but this is summaries that we have. Right? The needs for better communication. definition for communication, importance of healthy communication, reasons for communication background, the keys for healthy communication, and 4 ways to improve